Yeah.
And
Okay, it's 6 o'clock. Let's call this meeting to order. Notice of a special council meeting of the City Council of the City of North Kansas City, Missouri, September 22, 2020. Mr. Eric.
Thanks, sir. On October 15, 2019, the City Council conducted a special meeting to discuss the Armour Road Complete Street project, which had been completed shortly before. Over 70 people made remarks to the council about the project that night. At the conclusion of the public comments and City Council discussion, the council passed a motion to table any changes to the Armour Road Complete Street until the June 2nd, 2020 meeting, except for a couple of short-term issues, which we did address. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this consideration has been postponed a couple of times, but it is now occurring tonight. In July, the council directed that the meeting on this topic get all public comments submitted in writing ahead of time and be publicly posted ahead of the meeting. No public comments will be taken verbally tonight. Jay Aber and Thomas Moorfield of WSP, the project's engineer, are here if they can answer any questions you have. And this matter is now before council, and staff will try to answer any questions you have and take any direction you have. That concludes our staff comments, sir. Councilmember Smith.
So as a general order of procedure, what are we looking for out of this meeting, Eric? Are we looking for guidance? Is there going to be a motion? What does staff need from us? Is it directive? What are we thinking?
Well, you can vote tonight. This is a special meeting, so you can have a motion, a second, and a vote on some kind of specific direction. If after discussion you don't have that kind of clarity, you could provide us some guidance to follow up on. So it can be either one of those things. It can be a very clear motion directive, or it can be a request for some kind of further staff follow-up.
Okay. With that in mind, I guess I'll go ahead and get the discussion started. I've got a list of things. I went through the 115 pages of public comments and the traffic study. So there's a number of things that jumped out at me as things that people consistently ask for and things that could help going forward. So I'll list that off, and then we can discuss any and all of those things or other concerns that other council people have. First one and foremost that everyone seems to agree is the delineator posts. They're unsightly, and it looks like we're continually under construction. Understanding that they're serving a purpose now, and they were likely never a permanent solution, I would like to see staff come up with a solution or multiple solutions to remove those and replace them with something that would be more permanent. That's point one. Point number two, turning angles onto a number of streets and at the post office drop box. Armour and Iron came up a number of times on both directions. Saying if there's a car waiting to turn from Iron onto Armour and you're turning from Armour onto Iron, that's too sharp. There are tire prints on the curb at a number of spots. So I think we need to take a look at those. If that means redoing how the planter box sits, the kind of right angle that it creates to make it more of a smooth turn, something I would like considered. 3, at that same intersection, there's a number of ornamental grass plantings. They're very pretty, but they're also a little tall. So if you're sitting at Iron and you turn to look in either direction, you see grass, which can block your view of cars coming either direction. It would be helpful to see another type of planting selected that's not as tall. Number 4, traffic queuing between Howell and Iron on Armor. So during certain times of the day, pre-COVID, and sometimes still during COVID, the traffic will queue up because the turn lanes can only accommodate up to 2, maybe 3 cars, depending on length. This is something that's been discussed a little in the past about timing the lights maybe a little differently, since the cars can't pass once those turn lanes are filled. So light timing there. And then number 6 is the posts at Tay's Burger Shack, turning, I believe, onto Lynn. It makes for an awkward turn. So taking a look at either removing those posts or, as a long-term solution, another approach to that turning lane. And then my final point on this list is making the bike lane more visible, to paint it green, as is standard around the country. I'm not certain what the cost looks like with that, but getting a much more visible bike lane would stave off people accidentally parking in it if we approach a different type of barrier than delineator posts. So those are my initial thoughts, and I'd love to hear everybody else's.
Councilmember DeLong.
Tony, you had 7 there.
6.5, 7. Yep.
Okay, I was just writing down. Okay. No, so I agree with the delineators. That's definitely one that everyone's been getting on us since they've been installed for the most part. So I would definitely like to see those not totally removed. I'd like to see a lot of them removed, but a lot of them are, certain areas replaced to kind of help protect the bike lane as well as protect some of these corners. I agree with turn angles. I think that's something easy we could look at and help out with there. Grass, same thing. Notice that, that grass did get pretty tall there. So if we could see around that a little bit better. For the most part, I think it looks good. There's one more came up earlier today, is the turn lane at Fayette. And that is one I believe Council Member Safer may have something to say too. The turn lane at Fayette. So right now the bike lane just kind of ends there. It makes for an awkward ending as well. So if we can find a better way to make that more naturally end, because what I see now is I see a lot of cyclists, they'll cut over early and cut over into traffic. So it could be potential that we go ahead and cut that a little bit early so they can get in, and then recreate that right turn lane in that, what would be that void there. So that would be something I would basically add to the list of potential things. And that's all I have for the moment.
Mayor Stilo.
Yes, I understand the engineers that designed this are here.
Yes, sir.
I wish somebody could explain to me how they thought this was a good idea to start with.
Well, sir, this isn't really a question. With due respect, I don't think it's a question for the engineers. They were hired after the city had made a decision. We did go through a pretty substantial process with an advisory committee, eventual council approval. I do think, that ultimately it was the council that made the decision to go through with it. So, now with the benefit of having had some experience with it, the question is, do you want to continue with it or with modifications? Do you want to not continue it? Do you want to reverse it? And to Councilmember Smith's initial question, I think maybe that might be an initial way to go about this, is for the council to decide on that question, whether it wants to reverse course, stay where you are, proceed. We do have other phases that are currently planned, pending council decision. And maybe if you could provide some direction on that threshold question as to whether the project continues. Then if you decide that the project should continue, then it might be a good idea to get into some of the specific kinds of suggestions that Councilmember Smith brought up and that others of you might have. But if I might suggest that you have a general discussion on that question. Councilmember Stewart?
No, Lisa's first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Tolan and Councilmember Stewart.
I was just gonna back up to the post office real quick, and looking at that, I think turning into the mailboxes could be fixed with just striping. It's the striping that makes that turn awkward instead of just easing into it like a yield. But to kick off the, should we continue it? I would say definitely yes. As it is, no, we're gonna talk about changes, but the feedback that I'm getting, and nobody's going to get 100% feedback one way or the other. That was clear. But the feedback that I've been given is overwhelmingly in favor of, and surprisingly, it's a lot of walkers that really like it, which is great because that's part of the complete street. I heard lots of people say in walking around that the reduced speed, reduced traffic, slowing the cars down makes them feel safer. And also an interesting point that someone in the neighborhood had pointed out, that they think that this is perfect for the times too. So we know as COVID hits, more people are out walking, biking, meeting up outside, and it definitely goes along with that. So I'm excited to keep this going because right now bikes aren't using it because it's the middle piece. It's the middle piece. It's not connected to either end. So it's difficult to take those comments because it's just too short right now. It hasn't been connected, but I'm definitely in favor of going forward.
Councilmember Stewart and then Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, a couple things. The lineators there at the drive-through for the post office, they suck. I mean, it's face it. But when the cars are in that right lane where they should turn, and they don't, if they didn't, but then they'd be getting in the cars parked in front of the post office itself. So there does have to be something there to get cars back into the lane of traffic and not the turn lane. But, when it's all started, to me, it was more than anything to improve cycling and walking. And I don't think it's done either safely. The bike lanes are not safe. There's nothing to stop cars from hitting a bike except wind. And, that's not going to work. There's no protection for them. I think, before I forget it, most of the people I talk to, and I read some of them deals, they don't like the parallel parking. I think the only people that like the parallel parking is one that lives in the lofts. When this all started, it was my fault for not reading and looking at it right when they had the meeting, because I wasn't against this all in its entirety. But when they said parallel parking, I thought they meant up against the curb like it always been, and the bicycle path would be on the sidewalks, make a wider sidewalk. So that's my fault for voting for it, not realizing that. What I'd like to see, and I own a bicycle, but I would never drive on it right now, and I wouldn't have my grandkids ride on it. What I think should have been done, and it still could be, it'd be expensive though, is do what we're thinking about on Burlington. Have a bike trike, that's fine. I'm not against the bicycle trail lanes. Have it like you're going to do on Burlington, completely off the street. If you haven't studied the Burlington one, it's going to be behind the sidewalk. And look what they've done on North Oak, going up that hill. That sidewalk now is like 8 foot wide. And it goes all the way to Cascones, I think it does. Anyway. And that's safe, and they got a barrier. It's not safe the way it is. So why continue to build on what's not safe? If you want to have bike lanes, get them off the road, get the right of ways, whatever we got to do, and make them a nice, safe place to ride their bicycles. And I don't see a whole lot of people walking there either. And I'm out all the time. So that's more than a minute.
Councilmember Smith.
So Eric, like you
and then
asked,
Councilmember Clevenger.
we kind of need to set that directional piece before we start discussing specifics. So to that end, and I'm happy we can have more discussion after the motion, but I'll put a motion out to retain the changes with modifications. So keep the complete street with modifications that we can discuss and agree on now and in the future. And I would couple that with asking staff to bring us some options for these changes coming in the near future.
Second.
All right, so there's a motion and a second to retain the Armor Road Complete Street project with modifications to be discussed in the future and receive some staff input. Further discussion. Councilmember Clevenger.
Yes, thank you. This has been a really hot topic. As far as the safety, I mean, I own a bike as well. I've ridden it. I don't see the best, but I've always felt safe on Armor Road there. The parallel parking, kind of protects the bike lane. Some of the angles, like various council members, the turning angles need to be looked at. The delineators, I agree, are ugly. So I guess, my thing is, especially not just the cyclists, but walking. I'm a pedestrian as well. And the crossing islands are really helpful for pedestrians to cross the street safely. So that's the only things I wanted to add before Jesse made the motion. So I'll just allow that process to continue.
Further discussion? If no one would like to make any further input, then we can take a vote.
May I ask who seconded it?
So Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Tall.
Thank you.
And this is a vote to keep the
before we move
changes.
on, Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, did anybody actually add up the comments from the public? I mean, what percentage wants it to continue the way it is versus not?
I didn't take an exact percentage on it. I did note, that's why I've got, this list here of all the different things people have asked for. And the perspective I'm taking is, other than the ones that say, get rid of all bikes, period, then, I think we can accommodate a lot of the things that people are asking for while retaining the complete street. But I don't have exact percentages.
Any other questions or discussions on the motion to retain the project with modifications? Mr. Mayor, shall we take a vote?
Let's vote.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Toll,
Yes.
Councilmember Clevenger,
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Stewart,
No.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Farr,
No, ma'am.
Councilmember DeLong,
Yes.
Councilmember Saper.
No.
5-3.
All right, so the threshold question of whether to continue with the project, and there'll be more questions, I'm sure, tonight to resolve, but has been addressed, and the consensus of the council is to proceed. I would note that just for your consideration as we move forward this year, that we do have the phase 2 of the project that is in this fiscal year 2021 budget. We have phases 2, 3, and 4 that are planned over the next 3 years. That was subject to tonight's discussion. So with that, then, so I guess one question that we might ask council before the end of the night is whether we should plan on proceeding with phase 2. And we can discuss what that is if you're interested. So with that, is there further discussion then about modifications that the council would like to see in the project?
Sorry.
Yes, sir. Councilmember DeLong.
Okay. Can you remind us what phase 2 is first? Because some of the modifications may be captured within phase 2. So it might be better if you just give us a quick refresh on what phase 2 was.
So I'll ask our Community Development Director, Sarah Copeland, if she might summarize phase 2.
Sure. The improvements that were part of phase 2 as we budgeted it were to make intersection improvements at Armour and Howell. So very similar to what is existing at Armour and Iron. This would replace some of the delineators that are at Armour and Howell right now, because they would be replaced with curb. to create those bump out islands. But it was, phase 2 is intended to be just improvements there around Howell.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, you mentioned making the intersection like Armour and Howell, and nobody likes that. Even Jesse brought it up, the turn, since it up. If we're going to make it just like that one, what's the point?
Councilmember Smith.
Sure, yeah, and that's part of why I think that this needs to be discussed. What do we need to change at Armour and Iron so that we can then do it the right way at Armour and Howell? There's a lot of good at Armour and Iron. People love the crosswalks. They love the way the intersection itself functions for pedestrians. But the planters, the curb corners are tight, and I believe part of the rationale for having those corners the way they are is that it makes a slower turn. You have to think about where you're going when you turn. You can look for a biker, and that's understood. But a lot of the feedback, a lot of the negative feedback has to do with that specific turn, right-hand turn from Armour onto Iron. You can look, you can see all the tire marks on those. You can see where turning right from, let me get this right, northbound Iron onto Armour, onto eastbound Armour. Those planters have had to be, like the grass has had to be replaced a number of times where people have taken that out. So taking a good look at what those turns are actually doing in practice and getting those smoothed out before we move down to Howell and replicate it.
And I might say we could use the budget that's in the council budget now to make changes like the ones you're talking about before we proceed with a full second phase. But perhaps if I might ask the project engineers, either Jay Aber and or Thomas Moorfield of WSP, do you have any thoughts about the turning issues that have been discussed so far tonight? And could you identify yourself before you speak?
Yes, hi, this is Jay Aber with WSP. Thank you for having me here tonight for this discussion. The turning radii are flexible, certainly. One of the original things that was asked for with the complete street plan that was done with the community input was to make it safer for pedestrians and cyclists, and a lot of that is slowing the cars down as they turn, because we know right turn conflicts are a major safety issue for pedestrians and cyclists. So those curb radii were intentionally designed to slow cars down on the turn. We did do turning movement calculations for school buses to ensure that school buses could make the turn. However, given the issues that have come up, those curbs can certainly be made, those radii can be made larger, the turn can be made softer quite easily by just moving that curb a little bit. The design could be changed at Howell. It could also be retrofitted at Iron, certainly quite easily to make that turn radius a lot larger. And actually the turn radius that we have out there now is actually larger than what the turn radii were from the original curb lines. The original curb turns were about a 15-foot radius. And what we have there now is about a 20-foot radius. So that could be increased to 25, 30-foot radius. So actually by building those islands out there, it gives you a little bit more flexibility to actually increase that, that turn radius.
Other questions or discussion? Councilmember Smith?
Eric, remind me, was there a cost estimate done for painting the bike lane all in green?
We did not cost estimate it, but we did include that as an add alternate in our phase 1 bids. Not to paint the whole thing, but just to paint the conflict points. So around intersections and driveways. The low bid for that was a little over $23,000. So we did not include it because we did not have the budget for it.
Okay. I know at one point when we had a bike master plan meeting, one of the representatives, I don't want to throw the wrong paint company name out there. I know we have a couple in North Kansas City, offered to supply some paint for Sharrows. I don't know if we reached out to them or if they bid on any of this, but maybe have a discussion with them on, I know we're doing thermoplastic on a lot of this, but figuring out a way to make those bike lanes as clear as they possibly can be, even on the non-conflict points, because when you jump from pavement to green, back to pavement, back to green, it makes it look a little dicey rather than just one continuous green painted bike lane. It makes it very clear what's going on there. That's part of the visual disruption. It's not just the delineators, but we have hash marks, we have plus marks. We've got a lot of things that are non-standard road markings that it's visually confusing. It really is. So being as clear as we possibly can, while also not overspending, but getting some good bids on what that would look like.
So noted, sir. Councilmember Saper.
While the engineers are there, one thing I've never understood is the parallel parking. The businesses that are along there all have their own parking lots. Even the loft apartment has a large parking lot, and they're basically not used. If we could do away with the parallel parking, we could open up another lane in each direction, make turn lanes, and for relatively little cost, except of course at where the planters are. What was the rationale for parallel parking?
Sir, I'll ask you to maybe begin the discussion on that, and then if you want to turn it over to the engineers, you may. And because we did see a lot of comments about the parallel parking, we have worked up some possible concepts for not creating a new, not recreating the travel lane there, but perhaps doing something else with that space besides have it used for parallel parking, which we might put up on a screen for you to take a look at. They're just concepts. But Sarah, would you like to begin on the rationale for the parallel parking?
Sure. There are really, I think there's the planning and conceptual rationale, and then Jay can talk about the engineering rationale. One of the goals of this project was to extend the downtown character along Armour Road further to the east. And part of the downtown character of Armour Road is that there's on-street parking that's, even we have a couple of businesses in downtown that also have their own parking lots and still make use of on-street parking for some of their patrons. So we were working on a way to extend the character of downtown Armour Road further to the east by making it a more downtown design for the street. And I might be getting into a little bit of what Jay might say, but the other part of that is that having on-street parking is one of those elements that helps to slow down traffic because you have to go a little slower to look for people who are entering and exiting that on-street parking. So that was part of the design rationale. Jay, do you want to talk a bit about the engineering?
Yes, certainly. Again, this is Jay Aber with WSP. Sarah's correct. In the discussions from the original Complete Streets Plan, parking was identified as a really important thing for residents of North Kansas City and along Armour Road, especially to, in the future, incentivize further economic development. On-street parking is a really important part of businesses in a downtown type area, as we can see with the downtown Armour Road sections. And it also conveniently serves other purposes, primarily, as Sarah mentioned, the speed management. The speed of vehicles is probably the most important determining factor in the severity of a car crash. The faster a car is going, the more likely it is that that crash will result in an injury or death. And so parked cars on the street are one of the most effective ways to slow cars down. And so that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is providing that parking protected bicycle lane. As Councilman Clevenger mentioned, the bicycles are protected by parked cars when parked cars are present there. It's one of the most effective ways to stop a car that's leaving a roadways to have a parked car there. Really, the only other thing that can do that is a barrier, roadside barrier, or a jersey barrier, as you see on the sides of highways, curbs, other devices like that on the side of the road really will not stop a car from leaving the roadway. So parked cars are a really effective way to protect cyclists and pedestrians on those bike lanes. So there were several elements to that rationale, but the primary ones really were safety, slowing the cars down, which we can see in the reduced crash rates, the reduced injury crashes. We've seen about a 25% reduction in those injury crashes, and then a reduction in speeds, reduction in speeding violations. All that really points to the parking and the other improvements have really helped to slow cars down, but then also to help with that economic development in the future.
Before I call on Councilmember Smith and then Councilmember Stewart, I'd like to make one quick correction. Thomas Moorfield, who I mentioned earlier, is with Bike Walk KC, not with WSB. And they are here to discuss if the council has any questions about traffic counts or bicycle counts. That is their purpose here today. So I apologize for that. So I think, I'm sorry, Councilmember Smith and then Councilmember Stewart, I think, was it? Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So a couple things in response to Tony's question. What keeps seeming to get missed in the comments and in the questions and in the discussions is the goal of this project was not to promote special interest with a biker group. It was not to rip out Armor Road's traffic flow. None of that was part of it. It's to extend the downtown feel. It's to slow cars coming into the main part of North Kansas City, and to provide the multimodal transit. And we're already seeing the impact of having the extra parking space. So we've got a bakery coming in where the old Subway building was. Where you look at the YMCA right now, the spaces on the south side of Armor Road next to the YMCA, like, why are those there? Well, now we're going to have loft apartments there where people live and work, and there's going to be retail. And once Quick Trip's their ground lease is up, we're going to have downtown extending all the way down. So right now, when you look at it, it looks like there's no purpose for those spaces. But if we look down the road at what can happen now that we've taken this conscious effort, we're going to see some really good things coming down Armor Road. The second piece of it is constantly I hear, I don't see any bikers. Well, right now it's a bike lane to nowhere. It connects nothing, and it's going to, as part of the larger plan, connect to Burlington, which will run north and south. It's going to connect to the rest of the bike master plan. But right now, this was the first piece of a much, much larger plan. So I understand why bikers aren't out in droves riding up and down. Yes, they are. I see them quite often. But it's not just wasted space on the road. This is stuff that people are using and will use a whole lot more once it's part of a larger network. So I just hope that people aren't losing that in the rest of the discussion, the larger vision. And slowing down the traffic wasn't a bug of this. It was a goal. Like, we have slowed traffic down coming in. We don't have that racetrack right at Fayette where people are trying to cut in right in downtown where we have a lot of pedestrians. We've effectively moved that back to Knox where people are trying to cut in now. And they've got the post office box barrier, as Rick mentioned. But the slower traffic, the parking, none of this is an accident. This was all very intentional. And it's going to pay dividends as we go forward.
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, I can understand where they are parking now. It protects the bikes. When I said they're not protected, you're talking about the protection area. It's only about 1/10 of the whole system. It's in front of the loft apartments. It's in front of Dairy Queen, I guess, and City Hall. But on down, you get close to 210, there's nothing. There's nothing to protect them. And, I worked for the city for almost 40 years. I don't remember it being a racetrack. When you get down to 210, I would probably agree with you. But I don't think speed was a problem beforehand, up toward the city, the downtown. And still, the roadway, there's two main roadways in and out of Northtown, Armor and Burlington. So the priority still has to be transportation, not fun.
Other comments? Councilmember Smith.
So Eric, do we want to put some kind of timeline on getting this turned back around? We've got a list that may grow over time, but there's a basic list of ideas, primarily getting the delineators figured out and the turn angles taken care of. Do you need a time frame to come back to us with some solutions to discuss or to vote on? What would that look like?
You put me on the spot, right? I think we'd probably ask for at least a month, maybe, to be able to come back to you.
That's
Maybe
a short
longer
time
than
frame in my mind.
Yeah, we'd really like to be able to come back to you with options. I think the delineators one is a sticky one because we understand that they're unsightly and that's one of the main comments. Until the project is built out, we do need to find a safe way, and that we can try to come up with some alternatives to the current delineators, but a safe way to make sure that people don't travel in areas that they're not supposed to travel in. And right now the delineators are, they were always meant to be temporary, as you'd mentioned earlier, but until the project's built out, we're going to need to figure out some kind of alternative to that. And that'll be maybe one of our bigger challenges, I think.
Certainly. And I don't want to put you on the spot with a timeline at all, but if you talked with the engineers, if you talk with Jay and the group, and they say the delineators are our best bet right now, we leave them in, then we'll listen to the architects and the engineers. They know what they're doing. But we do want to see them removed. And I think that's going to go a long way to making people feel more comfortable driving down Armour Road and to a better public perception of what's going on. So to have the discussion, we don't have any sort of proposed solution right now. So I just don't want it to linger out 6, 8, 10 months and still have.
I'd ask for 2 months. How's that, sir?
You're fine with me.
Let me call on Councilmember DeLong and then Councilmember Stewart.
Well, I was just gonna ask a little bit more about structure, because we kind of have a list, but I also want it to be like a pretty defined list on what exactly you're taking away from this, instead of us just kind of keep throwing stuff out there. So do you want motions individually on modifications, on the general nature of the modification, or how would you like to have this done?
Well, I've been taking notes, although I'd want to go back and look at the recording and make sure that we've gotten all of the concerns that have been listed. I don't know that we necessarily need a motion on each of the items that Councilmember Smith listed, and then that some of the other council members have listed. I think we could try to take each of those points and address them in some kind of way for your future consideration. That would be my thought.
Okay, no, I was just kind of curious as we kept going on here. If there's anything maybe we aren't in support of doing that was on that list tonight.
Well, certainly if there's anything
keeping that going.
Yeah, if there's anything that you're not in support of, by all means, let it, that's been mentioned, but that you wouldn't want us to consider further, by all means, let us know. Yes. So,
okay.
Councilmember Stewart, I'm sorry, sir. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna go back to delineators again. And my only thing with that is definitely want to remove them, but definitely want to replace, certain parts of it where they were supposed to keep cars from being in the bike. I mean, if we could kind of guide the cars, keep them in the lanes, then some of those middle delineators don't really matter as much. So if you kind of bookend it with maybe some of the more permanent curves, then you can probably get rid of a lot of the ones that are in between those points, which will make it look a lot better. But that's it for now.
Okay, so I'll call on Councilmember Stewart and then Councilmember Tall. Has been pointed out to me, we can definitely look at these things that have been listed and any others that come up tonight. We do not currently have any kind of contract with our engineer, WSP. So we'd probably need to bring you some kind of a task order in the near future to fund some work. Now, we do have some money, as I indicated, in the budget for phase 2. We could use that money in the short run. But just to let you know that as of right now, we would need some kind of authority to do that, and we might look at putting something on your next agenda. Councilmember Stewart and then Councilmember Tall.
Yeah, you talked about, or some of us have talked about improving some of the things we've done. That lane I talked about that makes you turn onto Knox. the paint's almost faded on that lane. Now, I know it because I live here and I go down Knox to get to 24th. But a lot of people don't know that. And you see them trapped in there and trying to get back over, and it's traffic going back to the light. So they need to be repainted if nothing else. If you're in that lane and you see it, maybe then you'll notice them lineators up there that's going to keep you from going anywhere anyway, unless you run over them, which if you want to run over them, that's fine with me.
Councilmember Tull.
When you're looking at making changes with delineators, as far as the street looking visually cluttered and not as easy to navigate, I think it would be important to replace the delineators at the intersections. That seems to be the place where you can't really, like when it's up and curving. Do you know what I'm talking about? I guess I should pull it up on a map. Hold on, I'll pull it up on a map and be back.
Okay.
So in the meantime, does anybody have a comment or a question?
I'll make a quick comment. I think it's important, Eric, to get on the record how exactly, because a number of the comments mentioned how he had wasted taxpayer dollars. Getting on the record how exactly this was funded, again, for people who are listening. If you could run that number down really quickly. I know public grants, it was funded by a fuel tax surcharge. So if you have that off, or if you or Sarah could speak to that.
Sorry, sir, I hadn't been prepared for that one.
That's okay. So Sarah unmuted. I don't know if she had a comment on it.
I believe we use the Convention and Tourism Fund for most of this project. I know that the future phases are funded out of Convention and Tourism.
The first phase of construction was funded from Convention and Tourism. The planning study was primarily funded by a grant from the Mid-America Regional Council's Planning Sustainable Places program.
And Convention and Tourism funds come from where exactly?
That's from the hotel motel tax. So the 5% surcharge on hotel bills from people who stay in the city.
Thank you.
We can certainly give you more information about that when we, present more information in the future. We can recap that. Mayor Stilo?
Well, I heard numbers of something like we spent $800,000 on this thing.
I don't think that number is correct, sir.
I didn't think so.
I think it's between $400,000 and $500,000 that have been spent so far in that neighborhood.
Okay, I went back to look at the map just to make sure I wasn't seeing things. It's what you had already talked about, the bump outs that are already present around the Y. But when you go into if you keep traveling on the road towards downtown, you have delineators kind of like what could be a bump out in between intersections. And then you also have delineators at the intersections. If you had to choose what to do first, I would think that the bump outs at the intersections being replaced with something more concrete would be the best visually, just to kind of show you where your lane is all the way down. Although when the cars are parked there, I think that's probably the best way to see your lane.
Councilmember DeLong, and then Councilmember Clark.
Did you get what you needed on the Fayette right turn lane from me? Or I can kind of describe that again. The objective was to turn that back into a right turn lane again, potentially have the bike lane cross back over to the other side at that point, just so they're able to kind of naturally progress on the Armour instead of ending there at the sidewalk. That would be one thing I would want to consider.
All right. I think Councilmember Clark was next, I believe.
I think I'm just quickly trying to understand that we are potentially looking to reutilize the funds for phase 2, the Howell sort of continuum improvements around Howell, and routing those toward these modifications, correct? As far
At
as
least-
like softening the turns, delineators.
Yes, ma'am, at least in the short
Okay.
term. I mean, you could always consider amending the budget in the future then to continue the next phase of the project. But I think at least as a method of moving forward, we have funds in the budget for the Armor Road Complete Street project this year. So that's what I was suggesting.
Great, thanks.
Councilmember Farr.
Eric, I'm going to put out the date of December the 8th for you to come back with some ideas for us. That's about 2 months away on a Tuesday.
I think that would probably be a reasonable date for us to aim for. I mean, let me ask, Ms. Copeland and our engineers, given a task order that allows you to proceed, would that be a reasonable amount of time for us to provide some options to council on the various items that have been brought forward so far tonight?
Yes, from WSP's perspective, certainly.
Sarah, do you think that that's a reasonable time frame for us to be able to work with them to do that?
Yes, I think it is.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, I don't know what we can do to, the trucks that are westbound, they have to turn at Lynn. I don't know if a lot of them can't read, maybe not English, or they don't know what a hook arrow is, a truck route, the word truck route, because they're still coming through. And as we slow down the traffic coming into town, they really mess it up when they're in the same, when they go. And there's been several this past week or two I've seen that didn't get stopped by our police. And I think they're going to have to crack down again. Or I don't know what other signs anybody can recommend to get them in on the Lynn, because man, it really slows up traffic downtown when they're in the armor.
Councilmember Smith.
So the truck route's always been at Lynn, correct? Like they've always supposed to turn at Lynn. Now local deliveries are allowed. So if they're going to the mop bucket or delivering beer to a bar downtown, that would be fine. Do we have any kind of idea how many trucks go through in violation of the truck route turn versus those just making local deliveries?
Chief Freeman, do you have any thoughts or comments about that?
Sir, it'd be just a wild guess at this point. Certainly days or some days are worse than others. Sitting here and just watching out my window sometimes, you can see a handful daily. And yeah, our commercial vehicle inspection officer and the district officers that work Armor Road right there do address it from time to time, but certainly they get through. And to Councilmember Stewart's comment, yeah, the signage, we've talked about it, we've changed it, we've adjusted it over the years, many different ways. But unfortunately, these truck drivers are just following their GPS and the quickest route to their destination and probably just not paying attention to the signage. So we could definitely ramp up enforcement. I would argue that, we cite 10 tomorrow, there's 10 different ones doing it the next day. So that's difficult, but it definitely can be done.
Do they pay more attention to a low roof barrier sign, even if it's not the case?
Well, Kansas City would tell you based on that bridge they have over town where the trucks keep running into it and take the tops off their trailers. They don't pay attention to those signs either.
Okay.
Any other thoughts or comments from council? Councilmember Farr.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Toll,
Yes.
Councilmember Clevenger,
So soon? Yes.
Councilmember Stewart,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Farr,
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember DeLong,
Yes.
Councilmember Saper.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.